Hello, my name is Floyd Peunitz, and I would like to welcome you to Kinship's first Friday of the monthly Kinship worship. It's my privilege to introduce our guest speaker today, Andrew Curbs, and he's currently working as a practitioner for the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. His specialization is religious trauma. He's actively taking on new clients, and folks can check out his personal Instagram account at deconstruct_everything, or the Instagram account for the center, which is at Trauma Resolution and Recovery, all in one word. So let's sit back and enjoy and get a blessing from what Andrew has to share with us today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Andrew Curbs, and first I just want to say thank you to SDA Kinship for inviting me to share my story. I'm flattered that anybody would be interested to hear my story. I guess they say the best place to start is at the beginning, which that can be challenging to know where that is. So I come from a family that they are all Seventh-day Adventists. So I'm like a fourth, maybe even a fifth generation Seventh-day Adventist. My dad worked for the church for many years. He was a publishing director in more than one conference at different times, and that was very much the world that I grew up in. It wasn't until maybe 7 years ago, it was 2014, was when I really started backing away from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And even at that time, that was not at all my intention. My intention very much had been to become a minister. I had planned to go to seminary, become a minister, basically make the Adventist message, my entire life, my calling, my life, my career, all of that. But even before 2014, before that had happened, I can, in hindsight, see that the seeds were being sown that would lead to me eventually leaving and being done altogether. Just to make a long story very short and succinct in this regard, it was the church's handling of the whole issue of women's ordination, and also the church's lack of affirming its LGBTQ plus members. I myself am straight, hetero, all of that, but have always been bothered, very deeply bothered by the church's inability to just affirm its LGBTQ plus members, and the way that it would do mental gymnastics around the issues to basically try to not sound like they were non-affirming, but ultimately still being non-affirming. I went to, like many good Adventists, I went to an Adventist academy for 4 years, had gone to Adventist grade school before that. And I've had different friends through the years that were in the church, but were also queer, gay, lesbian, what have you. And just knowing the weight that they carried, the shame that was weaponized against them, how they were presented as less than a full human being, or salvation projects, if you will. It was something that even at the time it bothered me. And even then I still, maybe at the time I couldn't really maybe articulate and put into words how it bothered me, but it did bother me. And so fast forward again to 2014, I had sent off a letter essentially requesting sponsorship from my conference to go to seminary. It wasn't as impulsive of a decision as I maybe make it sound when I say it like that. I had like letters of recommendation and the endorsement of my local head pastor, who was a fairly prominent pastor in the conference, along with the head elder and a couple of other elders in the community. So I felt I had a pretty strong case to get that sponsorship and then go to seminary up at Andrews University. Never heard back from the conference for whatever reason. And that summer, so that was like April of 2014, I think. And this all coincided with that year I had set out to read the Bible through, along with the Conflict of the Ages series by Ellen White. Now, I had read all of these before and multiple times, but this year I had really set out on quite a lofty reading plan. Biting off more than I could chew would be an understatement, really. I had felt my faith struggling for honestly a few years at this point. I suppose you could maybe even say that it was an extinction burst of my faith. It was like that one last take a deep breath and give it all I had effort to hold on to my faith that I could feel slowly slipping away. And then compounding that with just the complete silence from the conference, I definitely took some time away to reflect. I took a step back and was just really reevaluating where I was in life, what I was doing. And it was at this point where I basically prayed the last real prayer that I can say that I ever really did. And that was, I don't remember verbatim, obviously, but it was, to paraphrase, it was in essence just asking God that if you're real, if you're still out there, if you have a particular plan for me, say something, show up in my life in such an unmistakable way that I actually know it's you, and I'll do whatever. At that point I was still desperate not to lose my faith. I wanted to stay in. I didn't want to go anywhere. And I just remember feeling as if the response to that prayer was just complete and total radio silence. And that persisted for a few months. I basically just went about my business. I still actually had an open application with Andrews University for the seminary, but I basically put that on the back burner and I applied to a local graduate school in my hometown to work on my master's in clinical mental health counseling. I knew that I wanted to help people in some capacity or another, whatever that might look like. So in that same prayer, I had kind of told God, well, look, this is what I'm doing. If this is not your path for me, you want me to go somewhere else, then pull me back, send me somewhere else. But until you speak up and I actually know it's you, this is what I'm doing. And that's what I did. I went full time into that program. It's actually a lengthy program. Even full time, it was a good 3 years basically. And, that included like my internships and practicum and all of that. And when I came out of it on the other side, my mental health was still pretty rough. My spiritual health, if you want to call it that. I mean, it definitely ties into my mental health. I would have still considered myself a Seventh-day Adventist at this point, even though I had not attended in years. But doing that degree and then working subsequently as a licensed mental health professional, as a psychotherapist, definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things. I was able to work within the community. My first job was at a community mental health agency. So, a lot of the folks you're working with are on Medicaid. They're low income. A good portion of them are there against their will. They've been told by a judge or by the Department of Social Services that you're going to go to these counseling sessions, or you'll lose custody, or you'll be incarcerated in some cases, depending on the context of the client and what they were dealing with. And this was stuff, I was seeing clients in the community. I was technically like a community-based outpatient therapist, and community-based simply meaning that about 75% of my clients, instead of them meeting me at my office, I met them in the community, wherever they were at their homes, at parks, restaurants, like little coffee shops, whatever. That was kind of like that was my job. That's what I did. And, I was going to houses and neighborhoods that I was familiar with. This is the town I've lived in for the past 15 years at this point. And so, I knew about all these places, and it was amazing because there's so many. So I'm from a place that has a lot of Adventist churches in the area. It's very densely populated with Adventists in the grand scheme of, compared to other communities across the country. And yet, but then I would go back to my church or rub shoulders with folks who were, from my church and see what they were doing. And, they would be like talking about an upcoming Revelation seminar. They would be raising money for, a mission trip in Guatemala, which is perfectly valid. But it was very much a point of disillusionment for me when I would see the immense need at the very doorstep, quite literally at the very doorstep of my church. And yet, hardly a finger would be raised to help these folks in our very own communities that desperately needed it. So that was certainly something that was eye-opening to me and continued to lead me in the direction and the trajectory that I was going in. Another pretty pivotal piece, I had already been out of the church for a few years at this point, and I received a letter from my old church in the mail, and it wasn't expected. I really didn't at this point get much mail from the church. I would get the magazines and stuff that just by being a member, I guess you automatically are subscribed to. But I didn't really get mail directly from my church. And so I actually thought maybe they were reaching out personally just to see where I'd been. Because before I departed, I had actually been pretty actively involved, leading Bible studies and doing different things. And I opened the letter, and instead it was actually a list of costs for the building project they were working on. They were basically renovating, revamping the whole church. It wasn't a new construction. They were just renovating everything, which the church did need it. That was valid, but it was hard, looking at some of the price tags and seeing like new audiovisual equipment, new stained glass, and seeing the cost of these things easily exceed $50,000 per item. And, and then again, and putting that in conjunction with other areas that I knew that money could really go far if it were to be invested in other places. And I guess to top it all off, when all of this was completed, the church, the inside, it looked great, but when it was all completed, it's like the church actually had less seating capacity than it had prior. So it's not even like they could say that they were expanding. Like literally they were just making the church a lot nicer for the folks that were already there, but we're actually taking away space, at least a little bit. So, excuse me. So, that was also a point that was kind of left me feeling a little disillusioned. And at this point, I was still very much considering myself an Adventist, but was very much becoming more disillusioned. And I also, within like the next year or so, was also going through a divorce. So yeah, needless to say, there were many, many things going on in my life simultaneously that were challenging. As my divorce wrapped up, I also took a job on the other side of the country. I would move from North Carolina to Oregon. And when I was in Oregon, I actually donated the vast majority of every Seventh-day Adventist book I owned. Not all of them, but probably a good 80% of them. I donated to the local church there. I'm surprised I donated them rather than just throwing them out, but I think I still felt too guilty to just toss anything like that in the trash. I felt like it needed to find a good home or something, and it was my responsibility to do so. So I did that. I was not there long before I moved to the Chicago area. In fact, that's where my girlfriend lives, and her family is from that area. And so I moved over there. Still very much not really sure what I was doing anymore. I suppose you could call it an existential crisis, or, attach whatever label you want to it. But needless to say, I was struggling. But I got another job in mental health. I actually worked in mobile crisis, which, if anyone knows what that is, it's you go on call shifts where you are the responding clinician when somebody, for example, is brought into the emergency room for self-harm or suicidal ideation. You assess them, and then you're pretty much making the call whether or not they need to be involuntarily committed. So it's a very high stress, high demand job, especially when you're doing this at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And for a variation of other reasons too. It's a very high stress job, needless to say. And kind of burned out on that one too. And so I was only there for about 5 months. And then I went to another job I was actually a school therapist, and definitely was a change of pace from what I had been doing with mobile crisis. It was very different, a lot slower pace, still stressful in its own way. But at this time I was also doing my own therapy. I was doing my own work, doing the work, as they say. And it was at this time I actually got the idea to maybe start sort of documenting this on Instagram or social media. So Instagram was what I chose. I had found some other folks on there who were doing good work. And really, when I created my account, it was just sort of to document this journey of self-exploration. It really wasn't, I wasn't trying to do anything beyond that, really. Fast forward to now, though, I have quite a few followers, quite a few, over 15,000. And honestly, it's helped me become connected with other professionals out there who specialize in dealing with religious trauma. And so fast forward to now, that's what I'm doing full time. I work as a practitioner for the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. I specialize in religious trauma, folks who are deconstructing from high demand religion, healing from high demand religion. I know deconstruction is such a buzzword, but whether or not you call it that, leaving behind a high demand faith or family system or both, as the case often is a highly stressful process. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of baggage there. And that's what I've been doing for a while, and it's interesting as I reflect back over the last several years, I can see, as the saying goes, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. At the time, I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know when for example, when I drifted out of the church, when I felt like I was just backsliding and I was just probably just like the story of the prodigal. And maybe one day God would come back into my life. I would return, to the church, and it never really happened. And, truthfully, since I left, some of the hardest years were to follow. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I also have to be honest and say that some of the best years, the most fruitful years, the most joyful years have also come since I left. And it's something now that as I'm sitting here now, and I'm thinking back over those years, it is still hard. And yet at the same time, I am recognizing how much healing has happened. Some of the baggage that I at the time thought I might never get rid of this, I recognize that it's still there, but it doesn't have the same hold over me anymore. I recognize that healing has happened, and I have been learning to live in the present, to experience joy. We always talk about, folks talk about sitting with your feelings and leaning into this discomfort, and we always, put negative connotations on that. But there's also the sitting with joy, leaning into the happiness, the fulfillment, the contentment. It's all there, If you're opening yourself and becoming vulnerable by, opening yourself to the capacity to feel pain, you're also opening yourself to the capacity to feel joy. And it's been interesting being where I'm at now and feeling like I'm finally myself, if that makes sense. It's a difference I would have never been able to articulate or pinpoint years ago when I was in the church, where I was feeling like my only usefulness is to serve the church or to serve God, i.e., whatever the church deems that should look like. It's interesting. There's a quote that has meant a lot to me through the years, and it's for those of you who are familiar with Khaled Hosseini. He wrote The Kite Runner and some other books, but The Kite Runner is where this one particular quote comes from, and it's always been meaningful to me. And he says, "I wondered if that was how forgiveness budded, not with the fanfare of epiphany, but with pain gathering its things, packing up and slipping away unannounced in the middle of the night." And you could just swap out the word forgiveness with healing. And I think that that's been kind of where I've been at. I want, maybe that's how healing budded, not with the fanfare of epiphany, but with pain gathering its things, packing up and slipping away unannounced in the middle of the night. So, trying to wrap up this video, I don't want to go too long for you guys, but I definitely am very reflective, I guess. I'm very reflective and thoughtful these days on the journey that I have had since leaving Adventism. I'm not antagonistic toward Adventism, though, or any church for that matter. I recognize how high demand and fundamentalist type mindsets can cause and perpetuate harm, and I also know that most of the folks within those systems were harmed by it, as well as learned to perpetuate it as a means of survival. And maybe that's giving too much grace, I don't know. But the point is, I'm grateful to still be around, to still be on this earth. I'm grateful that, and I have to smile at the irony. The church that I thought would be the centerpiece of my identity and my career 8 years ago or so, I suppose in some way it still is, but maybe not in the way that I thought it would be. And so there is a certain irony, poetic irony to that. Now on Saturday mornings, I'm not in church, but I see several clients who themselves are committed to finding themselves again, trusting their bodies, healing trauma, building a meaningful life that brings them joy and contentment. And, I really couldn't ask for more. And to bring this full circle, I appreciate again that, like I said earlier, I appreciate SDA Kinship asking me to share this with you. I hope that it made sense and wasn't too much of just a rambling monologue. I'm grateful for the work that SDA Kinship does. Just knowing personally quite a few friends who have grown up in the world of Adventism as LGBTQ individuals, and knowing how hard that is, I am so grateful for SDA Kinship and the resources they offer, especially because I know how rare and limited those types of resources are, especially within Adventism. So with that being said, thank you very much. And again, if anyone would like to find me beyond just this video, right now my primary presence online is on Instagram. You can find me just by searching my name, Andrew Curbs, or Deconstruct Everything is my Instagram handle. And thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing that interesting topic and talk with us. Definitely interesting and somewhat potentially controversial for some, but religious trauma is something that most of us have experienced in the LGBTQIA community, so something that's very relevant for us. And I'm glad you're there for any one of us who wants to talk about it, that you could help us with that. I know I follow Andrew on Instagram, and I invite everyone else that's listening to do the same. You can go to @deconstruct_everything and find him there. Be sure and follow him, like his posts, and share him with your friends and family. And thank you again for joining us this evening for Kinship Worship. It happens every first Friday of the month, so be sure and mark your calendars so that you won't miss next month's. And if this is your first time joining us, there are other podcasts or other broadcasts available. You can go to our YouTube channel @SDA Kinship INT and see them there. Or you can follow us, like I say, the first Friday of the month on our Facebook page @sdakinship.org. If this is the first time you've heard of SDA Kinship, we're the only LGBTQIA+ affirming group for current and former Seventh-day Adventists who identify as LGBTQIA+, and we're not only available or accepting of those, but we're also accepting of parents and families of LGBT individuals, as well as any supportive allies. If you haven't heard about us, go to our website, sdakinship.org. Check us out there. And if you click on the Join Now tab, you can become a subscriber and find out all the news about what's happening next. We have a lot of exciting things coming up in December, and even more for the new year of 2022. So please stay tuned and listen for our e-news broadcasts, and we'll share more about what's happening. Also, we're starting a new podcast called Kinship Connects, so you can also find that on the YouTube channel. So be sure and connect with us there. If you have any questions, you can always contact me at info@sdakinship.org, and I'm happy to respond to you. Thanks a lot. Have a blessed Sabbath, and have a great day. And remember that God loves you unconditionally, just as you are. Thanks.